Hello and welcome to Global Lens. Over the next 30 minutes, we put the spotlight on all the top stories from around the world. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Our top story, a high-stakes day of diplomacy in Washington. US President Donald Trump welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky along with 7 European leaders to the White House. The series of meetings included both a one-on-one with Zelensky and a broader gathering with European heads of state. Observers say the Trump-Zelensky meeting was far more warm and conciliatory than their heated exchange just months ago. Trump floated the idea of security guarantees for Ukraine, supported by European partners, but offered no concrete timelines or framework for a peace agreement. The Ukrainian president, for his part, repeatedly expressed gratitude for American support. On social media, President Trump revealed he's now working to set up a meeting between Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is first bilateral and then possibly a trilateral summit. Zelensky, speaking at a news conference, said he is ready to meet Putin in any format. And in a lighter moment, Trump, who had once criticized Zelensky for turning up to the Oval Office in combat fatigues, this time praised him for wearing a suit.
President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good on
I
you.
said the one that attacked you last time. See, now I remember that.
Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelensky.
In the same suit. You see, I changed, you are not.
Is there a date for you to meet with President Putin?
The date?
Yes.
No, we don't have any date.
No
We don't have any date. We just confirmed after this productive meeting with the President and then with all our colleagues, with the partners, we confirmed that we are ready for a trilateral meeting. And if Russia proposed to President of the United States bilateral, and then we will see the result of bilateral, and then it can be the trilateral. So I said always, so Ukraine will never stop on the way to peace, and we are ready for any kind of formats, but on the level of leaders.
There'll be a lot of help. When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
And joining me now to discuss this further is Daniel Fried, former US Ambassador to Poland and Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Fried, thank you very much for joining us on the program. If I were to ask you to rate the success of the Trump administration with this meeting with Zelensky, European leaders, in the backdrop of what has happened with Putin, how would you rate the success and why?
A lot better than the blow-up in the Oval Office last February, and a lot better than the meeting in Anchorage between Trump and Putin. The meetings in the White House yesterday were a step forward, not dispositive, but you can see the outlines of a sustainable peace emerging if, but only if, the Americans and the Europeans are serious about security for Ukraine. They're going to have to stare down Putin. Trump will have to do that too. We're not there yet, but you can see a plausible path to a peace which is not just. It won't be a just peace while parts of Ukraine are occupied, but it could be a sustainable peace. So we are better off than we were, but major tests, in fact, the major tests are yet to come.
Right. Do you think the US president has enough leverage to make Putin agree to a deal? Because currently what Putin is asking for in terms of letting him control territories like Donbass, this is not going to be acceptable to either Ukraine or the Europeans.
Well, the US does have leverage, and we shouldn't let it leak away. I was astonished to hear Secretary of State Marco Rubio over the weekend say that we shouldn't use economic pressure against Russia because it would harm diplomacy. What? Economic pressure is what is going to back diplomacy. We have economic tools to put pressure on the Russians. We have the ability to put even more pressure by arming Ukraine and by setting up mechanisms to make sure that the flow of arms will continue. We should use that leverage and not simply back away in the name of what? Goodwill? Are we kidding? Putin is not a person of goodwill. He is a person who will respect strength, and we need to show it. But I think that the meetings yesterday were moving in the right direction. Only, as I said, we're going to have to maintain our strength and stare down Putin. That won't be easy.
Right. Now, in terms of imposing further sanctions, what would you be recommending and alluding to?
Well, look, the tariffs against India for purchasing Russian oil were, how can I put this, clumsy. Okay, why pick on India in particular? That as a signal to push back against the Russians, I get it, but that wouldn't be the way I would go. Still, if you want to put economic pressure on Russia, you have to go after its oil sales. You have to go after its revenue. The point is to take money out of Putin's war machine, not simply reduce the volume of oil going out. We have options, maybe a little less clumsy than tariffs against India. There are ways to do this, and we need to mean it. And if we do, Russia's economy, which isn't in great shape, is going to get a lot worse. So we have the ability to push Putin. He's very good at bluff. He's very good at brag. He's very good at strutting around. But so were the Soviet leaders for a while, and that didn't turn out so well for them.
Right. Ambassador Fried, you said that US should not pick on India. Are these tariffs, there are 25% additional tariffs which are going to come into effect on the 27th of August. That will take the tariffs on Indian products to 50%. Do you think Trump is unnecessarily damaging a good bilateral relationship? And by damaging this, sacrificing India, he's not going to make any headway with Russia on ending the war in Ukraine?
Well, going after India alone while not touching China undercuts the purpose of the move. As a kind of abstract signal, I understand it, but that would not be my preferred policy approach. If you're going to go after the revenue from Russian oil sales, you have to be even-handed and go after all the purchasers of Russian oil, and you have to figure out a way that you're not hurting them, but lowering the revenue Russia gets for selling the oil. There are some ways to do that. With Iran, we threatened sanctions against countries like China and India that were buying Iranian oil, but we waived those sanctions if China and India and other countries were significantly lowering their purchases of Iranian oil. Something like that might work. Or finding a way to put taxes and take some of the money from Russian oil sales if they use Western tankers. And we ought to make sure we go after the shadow fleet so they can't use tankers off the system. My point is that there are ways to do this that don't single out individual countries. And going after India first and only would not be my first choice, put it that way.
Right. What we'd also like to ask you, did you get a sense that Ukraine and President Zelensky handled President Trump much better this time? There was a lot of warmth from the time he got down from his SUV at the White House. Zelensky said, President Trump, I'm wearing my best. And President Trump said, I love your suit. Do you think Zelensky came better prepared this time around?
You know he did. I was watching live the February meeting in the Oval Office, and it was a disaster because Zelensky was trying to win an argument. That's not the point. The point is to advance your objectives, which is not the same as winning the argument. This time, Zelensky did it right. Look, I am no particular fan of President Trump's style, but it doesn't matter what I think. The fact is, Zelensky, the Europeans, everybody needs to take this into account and act accordingly. Yesterday's meeting was a success. The Americans offered something we've never offered before, which is to participate in security guarantees for Ukraine. That's a very big deal, and I give Trump credit for it. Now, we have to find out what that means. The Russians will hate it. They will fight it. We're going to have to push back. And Trump has never been willing to actually push back hard against Putin, and he will have to in the future if this is going to work. But after yesterday's meetings, it's pretty clear that there's a path forward if we have the strength to take it.
Right. Ambassador Fried, the impression that one gets in India is that more than Putin, it is Donald Trump who wants an exit from the US out of this war. At the start of the Trump administration 2.0, Donald Trump said he'll be able to end this war very soon. He's not been able to do so. It is challenging. Considering the circumstances right now, what do you think will be the terms that would finally be agreeable to both parties, Ukraine and Russia?
There have always been two big elements to a sustainable settlement. Most important is security for Ukraine. Ukraine simply can't rely on Russia's promises. That's worthless. A peace which leaves Ukraine in a gray zone of insecurity is simply an invitation to the next war. So there has to be security for Ukraine. That security has to be backed up either by NATO, that would be my first choice, or this European coalition of the willing with US backup. It can be done. The second issue is territory. It's not right to ask Ukraine to give up its territory. The best solution would be a settlement based on a provisional but not time-limited line of contact, like the line between East and West Germany, never intended to be permanent, but it kept the peace during the Cold War, or the Korean Armistice line, not permanent, but it's worked for 75 years. Something like that would be best. If it comes to a formal transfer of territory, this violates a whole lot of US policy and international law. It's a bad idea. If the Ukrainians agree to it, they're not going to agree to Russia's terms. Russia wants the Donbass, it wants to keep Crimea, but it can't demand Ukraine retreat from territories Russia hasn't been able to conquer. So the territorial issue is a big one. I can see not a peace that isn't just, but might be lasting. That could happen. Security and territory are the two big issues. And Zelensky is not going to settle. He won't settle on territory until he has security.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Fried, for joining us with those very important remarks. That's all we had time for on this segment. Let's move on and take a look at all the other news that we are getting from around the world. SoftBank Group is set to invest $2 billion in US chipmaker Intel. SoftBank will buy nearly 87 million shares at the price of $23 a share. The transaction is expected to give SoftBank around 2% stake in Intel. This will make it the chipmaker's sixth largest shareholder. And speaking of Intel, the Trump administration is in talks to acquire 10% stake in the company via the CHIPS Act. As per a Bloomberg report, the US government could also consider converting some or all of Intel's grants from the 2022 Act into equity in the company. The semiconductor giant has been awarded about $11 billion in CHIPS Act grants. This includes $8 billion to support its domestic investment and $3 billion to boost its semiconductor manufacturing for national security. Israeli forces have killed at least 26 Palestinians since dawn in Gaza. This includes 8 people who were killed after their tents were blown by the IDF. Hamas has informed mediators that it has approved a proposal for a ceasefire deal. Israeli forces have killed over 62,000 Palestinians in Gaza since the war began in 2023. OpenAI has launched a new subscription plan for Indian users called ChatGPT Go. It's a low-cost subscription plan that will feature enhanced message limits, image generation and chat memory. The new plan will cost 399 rupees per month. The company has said that the rollout will be gradual and the option will appear for users on the app and the website in the coming days. Coming up, as India's ties with US take a tough turn, India seeks to stabilize its bilateral ties with China. Details on the other side. Welcome back to Global Lens. US has cornered India for its purchase of Russian oil, slapping India with tariffs of 50%. However, US is pursuing a trade deal with China after its restrictions on the export of rare earth magnets. With ties between India and US taking a rough turn, India is now looking to stabilize ties with China. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Prime Minister Modi ahead of his visit to Tianjin for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit later this month. The Chinese minister also met National Security Advisor Ajit Doval for a special representatives dialogue on the border issue in New Delhi. The Chinese official said that stability has been restored at the border. He added that the setbacks India and China faced in the past were not in the interest of both countries. The sentiment was echoed by NSA Ajit Doval as well, who said, and I quote, "Peace and tranquility has prevailed over the past 9 months." The Chinese leader also met External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar to discuss bilateral ties and trade relations yesterday. This marked the second such meeting between the two nations since 2020. Meanwhile, sources have told CNBC-TV18 that the discussions between Wang Yi and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar were substantive. China has also lifted restrictions on the export of rare earth magnets, tunnel boring machines and fertilizers to India. Sources have also indicated that clearances are being given to Indian shipments and they're likely to be dispatched soon. Now, joining me to discuss this further is Abraham L. Newman, Professor and John Powers Chair in International Business Diplomacy at Georgetown University. He's also the author of a piece on the weaponized world economy, surviving new age of economic coercion in the Foreign Affairs magazine. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Newman. You've written a lot about the weaponized world economy, but do you also feel that it is this strategy of weaponizing natural resources, technology, manufacturing that is now coming to haunt the United States?
Well, thanks first for having me here. I think my co-author and I, Henry Farrell, we've been working for about a decade, basically saying the world is experiencing, a new age where the networks that were created as part of globalization are increasingly being used as weapons by states against each other. And yes, we need to create a system where these things don't get out of hand. If they're just used increasingly, for every diplomatic problem, then yes, there will be a backlash, and that will not just harm the particular parties involved, but also U.S. interests over time.
Right. Also, in the current negotiations between US and China, we've seen the trade truce being extended. But between the two countries, who do you think has more leverage in talks when it comes to economic resources and manufacturing?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is, a once in a generation transformation of the global economy, one in which the US and China are in a negotiation over how to rebalance their trade relations. And I think in terms of the pain points, each is demonstrating that they have unique ways to strike out at the other. So you have both the US using tariffs, but also targeted export controls, China retaliating with controls on rare earth metals, and even more importantly, the machines that are used for processing those technologies. And ultimately, it's just creating a lot of uncertainty. I don't think anybody can say who can win in the moment. It's more about the amount of just transformation that's happening that firms in the US and China and India all have to prepare for, because this isn't about a one-off interaction. This is much more about a longer-term transformation.
Right. We are facing our own informal economic sanctions from China, or economic coercion, so to say. Since April this year, China did not allow any export of high rare earth magnets to India. They did so for US on a case-by-case basis. They did so for European companies as well. There was this, unsaid ban on export of specialty fertilizers, tunnel boring machines. How do you see this strategy of economic coercion, weaponization of resources being used by China against India? Do you think this could worsen in the years to come?
I mean, every country in the globe has to be prepared for this to accelerate in the coming years. What we're seeing is that this is not a story just about China, the US, it's happening globally. If you think about the sanctions that were imposed by the European Union on Russia, they used their centrality in the assets that the Russian central bank had to seize those assets. And so, China uses this coercion in an increasing amount, whether it's against salmon from Norway or products from Australia. It has targeted an increasing number of states, and the case of India is just, I think, one of the more recent. And I think firms and the government of India has to be prepared that it will meet these types of challenges from across the globe, whether it's the United States or China.
Right. There is an important meeting underway in New Delhi where the Chinese foreign minister is visiting. He's met the Indian external affairs minister, the national security advisor, and the prime minister. Sources tell us that China in these meetings has agreed to lift the restrictions on rare earth magnets, tunnel boring machines, and also fertilizers. But do you think all of this is temporary? It is tied to what are the kind of concessions that India can give?
What my research shows is that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the global economy works, in which the key markets for countries are often based around companies that are not decentralized. It is not a flat world like we were told. Instead, it's a hierarchical world. It's a centralized economy. And those pressure points, whether it's those rare fertilizers, the rare earth metals, the tunnel boring, those are just examples of this phenomena where countries like India are dependent on very specific products from other countries, whether it's China or the US or others. And that gives the state, the Chinese state, the US state, leverage. And what we're seeing, I think, in these negotiations is China is in a difficult bind because of its interaction with the United States. So it's trying to ease up pressure on other countries. But I don't think you should expect that that's a permanent solution or a permanent new deal. It's just a momentary kind of pause in those interactions. And so I think everybody, whether it's the government of India or companies, have to prepare themselves for a world in which those pressure points, these dependencies, are used for leverage.
Right. China, when it comes to dealing with China, since we had border clashes in 2020, when there was a clash between Indian and Chinese forces at the border, since then, India has been putting restrictions on Chinese investments. There is a rule that was introduced which said that, and it has been in place for the last 5 years, that no Chinese investment or investment from land border countries can come into India via automatic route. It has to be vetted by the government. And these clearances, while they have been coming in for companies like Apple, for JVs with Chinese entities in India, it is coming very slowly, 6 to 8 months or even a year for the approvals to come in. China has been complaining of lack of market access, lack of a level playing field. Do you think it is important for India to continue with such economic restrictions on China?
Well, I would just say first, it is pretty laughable for China to argue about level playing field or market access restrictions. The Chinese economy has an endless number of restrictions on access by foreign companies or foreign investors. So no one should listen to those types of arguments from the Chinese. That being said, what the risk is once the world economy is weaponized, that states can then use that as a blanket argument to transform their relations vis-a-vis the world in a way that might not be beneficial to their citizens and their firms. And so what you really need to do is have a very thoughtful risk assessment where you don't make blanket restrictions that cut off funding and economic activity from two countries completely, but rather think about where are the most at-risk sectors, where are the ones that create those dependencies, how do you create diversification in finance, technology, supply chains that minimize the ability of those countries to weaponize their relations against you. So I think it's about being nuanced in how you approach this. Otherwise, you're likely to get market fragmentation that will really make everybody poorer. And that, I think, every government has a goal of trying not to do that.
Right. What would be your reading of Xi Jinping's policies over the next 5 to 6 years? What is the kind of approach that we could see from Xi Jinping when it comes to the global economy and use of economic coercion?
Well, I think it's really up to the world to put pressure on China around issues of oversupply. I mean, that is, in the last several years, what China has done is tried to manage its economic issues by stimulating manufacturing. And then the result of that is basically low cost products across a whole host of technology sectors are being exported. If you just look at, let's say, electric cars and the price that they are being offered and the amount that are then being shipped overseas, it's really dramatic. And so for many other countries, they are going to face how do they maintain their own manufacturing industries when they're faced with this oversupply of Chinese goods. And so it's up to the world to say, look, we need to get this back in balance and we need to figure out a way in which we can all grow together. What is Xi going to be doing? I mean, he is in the midst of both this an economic transformation domestically where they're faced with a huge aging economy, and he's going to be under increasing pressure to deliver for that society. And so it's going to be quite difficult, and that's why I think the world has to come together and say we have to maintain a free and open trading system for those people that want to maintain that. The U.S. is pulling back from that system, but I think many countries, whether it's Japan, the European Union, or Australia, they all have an interest in maintaining that, and they should work together to make sure that China and the United States are delivering a set of policies that are bringing prosperity to the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Abraham Newman, for a very interesting conversation on weaponization of the world economy and how India can survive this age of economic coercion as well, not just from China, but it's also from the United States currently that we are seeing. On the final cut this evening, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's arrival at a U.S. summit went viral. This after she greeted U.S. Chief of Protocol Monica Crowley with a traditional Indian namaste. The video sparked buzz on social media, with some calling it the Modi effect and others pointing to her rapport with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. That's all on this edition of Global Lens. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.